Hi everyone, I'm Mary from Joyful and Mary Quilting, and today we are looking at two different ways to make a beautiful framed flying geese style unit. There are two. The popular way, called the stroked flying geese method, you see all over blogs and YouTube, and then my foundation pieced framed units that look similar that you make two at a time. Now before I demonstrate anything, let me show you what I have on my design board here. First of all, 4 units here made using the traditional stroked flying geese method, or 2 units made using my framed flying geese foundation with the paper still on. You can see what I've done here. So let's take a look at this design board, and this gives you a visual of how these two approaches are going to compare. We're going to begin first of all by making the stroked flying geese units. Now keep in mind, the stroked flying geese method creates a unit that measures, right here, finished, at 2.5 by 5 inches. If you've ever tried to plug that size into a block or a border or a quilt layout, it really can be tricky. It doesn't match the proportions of a traditional flying geese unit, which is usually 2 by 4 finished or 2.5 by 4.5 unfinished. So this particular measurement doesn't always play nicely with standard quilt math. But let's make these units together and then you can decide. Okay, so to make an unfinished 3-inch by 5.5-inch stroked flying geese unit, which is going to be 2.5 by 5 inches finished, we'll actually be making 4 of those. This is what you will need. These are the fabrics you'll need to make 4 of these units. First of all, you're going to need 4 4.5-inch squares of one fabric. That's going to be your goose fabric right here. You will need 2 4.5 inches by 2-inch pieces of your frame fabric and 1 2-inch by 10-inch piece of the frame fabric. So we'll show you in the steps how those all come together. Finally, you're going to need 4 3 3/8 inch squares from your background or your sky fabric. So this is the supplies that you'll need. Now let's put them together. Okay, for step 1, we are going to sew a 4.5-inch by 4.5-inch square to each side of our frame fabric, this 2-inch by 4.5-inch piece. Keep in mind, all of our seams are always 1/4 inch, and you are going to press toward that center piece of frame fabric on both sections. So let me show you what that looks like. Here we have, the pieces are sewn together now. Again, the 4.5 by 4.5 on each side. You are pressing toward that center piece of frame fabric. So when you're pressing, whatever you're pressing toward goes on top. We'll press here and press toward the fabric. So you're going to do that so that you have these 2 sections. And then we will add the long piece in between. So that will connect the 2 pieces. Now the long piece, as you can see, it's a little bit longer than need be. We can trim that back. The crucial part on this is, first of all, center, pin, and sew this piece together. Press toward this fabric. And then when you add this piece, you want to make sure that these pieces are lined up. So let me show you how to do that, otherwise it's going to be off. Okay, so I have sewn the center strip to the first section of our 4.5-inch squares and our 2 by 4.5-inch strip in the center. Now you can trim off those extra pieces. We don't need them. And the critical part of this block, and one of the things, you just have to be so careful with accuracy on this block, and I still had a bit of trouble with it. But what you want to make sure is that this piece looks like it is woven underneath this cross piece. If it's over here and you sew it this way, it's going to look crooked and it's not going to come out correctly. So you want to make sure that these 2 pieces right here are lined up. So here's how we do that. Turn it so that we have our wrong side up, and then I'm going to take my ruler, and you can feel right here your ruler is going to bump up against that seam that we've already sewn. We want to also line everything up somewhere on one of our straight edges so that we know that we have everything right. So I've got it bumped right up against there, and I'm going to make a mark up at the top. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. I'm going to bump it right up to the edge. And if you're doing sashing or anything, this works really well. So now I have 2 guide marks. I'm going to take the piece that I already have, and I'm going to line up these 2 guide marks with the seams right here. So that way, if you fold it back, you can see everything lines up, and it looks like it just goes right underneath that center cross piece. Then you'll want to just pin and sew a 1/4 inch seam right along that edge, pressed toward that center strip. So I've done that, and you can see everything lines up nicely right there. This piece actually, if you measure it, it's going to measure a 10-inch square. So that's what we need here, is a 10-inch square. So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to cut out a 6 1/4 inch square out of a piece of cardstock and use that as your template. And it needs to go through the middle of each one of these frame pieces. The 6 1/2 inch ruler doesn't work easily for this because you've got that extra 1/4 inch. So the suggestion with the pattern was that you cut out of cardstock or whatever a 6 1/4 inch square to be used as a template. So that's what I did. This is my 6 1/4 inch square. Now I want to make sure this is lined up in the middle, and if you look at this, how do we make that line up in the middle? The best way to do that is just to draw a line on the midpoints of each one of these, and folding it is very helpful. So if you fold this, you can finger press it and leave it that way, and hopefully you can see that crease. But if you can't see the crease, if it's difficult for you, just mark it. It doesn't matter. You're going to cut all this apart anyway. So if we take this and we line up that midpoint where we folded it, we know that it's 5 inches. So this is my 5-inch ruler, and I am just going to make sure everything lines up here, and I'm going to draw a line right down the middle. And then I'm going to do the same thing this direction. Again, it's 5 inches. And I'm just going to draw right down the middle of that one. Now I have a guide for my template. So I'm going to put the template on point, and I want all of the corners to match. And when they all match with a line, we know we have this template centered, and you can see I have. Now if you want, you can use some glue stick and put some glue under here to hold that in place. Again, totally up to you. But what we're going to do is we are going to cut out that square in the center. So you want to be really careful that you don't move anything, and we have everything lined up the way we want it to, and then we're going to cut it out. There's one. I'm in a little awkward position here, so try and cut it off without cutting off my template. Okay, so there's one side. Now, we know this needs to be 6 1/4. So we're going to do this. We've got 6 1/4 on each of the edges. And everything lines up, as you can see. And then we're going to finish making that cut. Okay, so this is the piece that we're going to be dealing with. This is the part that I have an issue with. These are all extra. This is just extra pieces that you had to cut off in order to come up with this. And I think that's a lot of waste. Okay, so now that we have this piece here, we're going to make those 4 units. That's where we want to take our 4 pieces. We're going to use 2 of those first of all. And we are going to draw lines on those from corner to corner and then draw our sewing lines. So make sure that you have your wrong side up. So I have my wrong side up, and then I'm going to take my ruler. I'm going to draw corner to corner on the wrong side, and then I am going to place the 1/4 inch marking my ruler just to the left of that drawn line because my pencil lead takes up space. So I've got it drawn here, then I'm going to flip it around this direction, and I'm going to draw another 1/4 inch seam on the opposite side of that center diagonal line. Okay, the outside lines are our sewing lines, the inside line diagonal is our cutting line. We're going to do the same thing here. I'm going to draw those lines, flip that around, And now we have these two pieces that we are going to line up with our square that we've cut out. So we've got one here, and then we're going to continue on, and we've got one here. We want to just line up all those edges. These kind of go right down through the middle, and then I like to put a couple of pins in it just to hold it in place while I'm sewing. Then you're going to sew on those marked lines on each side. Sew on one line and then on the other line. So go ahead and do that. Okay, I have sewn on those lines. Take my pins out, and I'm going to cut apart the two pieces right on that diagonal line. So you'll cut that out. And we have these two units. The two units we need to press then toward the triangles. So you're going to want to do that. Okay, so now I have pressed them. The final step is we are going to once again draw those diagonal lines just like we did previously on the wrong side of these two pieces. So once again, make sure you line up those two corners with your straight edge. We're going to draw our line just to, we'll put our 1/4 inch line just to the left of that center line, flip it around, same thing here, 1/4 inch line just to the left, there's one, and repeat the process with this piece. Okay, now we are going to line up these pieces with the corner, and again we will sew on each one of those sewing lines, the line that's been marked on each side of that diagonal. So we've got this one, and we've got this one, and then you're going to go ahead and sew on that line. Here, 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 and here. So go ahead and do that. Okay, so I have done that. Now let's cut these apart just like we did with the others. We're going to cut right on that center diagonal line. And this is going to give us those 4 units, those 4 stroked flying geese units. They are going to be pressed toward the corners. And as you can see, here we have the units. Now, I'm going to show you, we'll go ahead and iron those, press those toward the corners. And here are those 4 units. Now let's take a look, let's measure those. They need to be 3 inches by 5.5, and you know, you can see I was really careful, but they just don't come out as accurately as I would want. We need to have that 1/4 inch here, so we can trim this top off, and it's pretty close, but right here it's not. Trim the sides. This corner point needs to go right here at that 3, and the same thing here. So this one is off. Let's see about this one. And I have found this now. This one's better. If we look, this one, look, we're pretty good here. We would just trim this one off here and here, and then flip it around. I just found it to be so unpredictable. Now, did I get sloppy? Well, yeah, obviously I must have, but I didn't think I did. And for me, for all that fabric waste, to have 1 or 2 that don't work, I think is too much. So here we have that 5.5 by 3. I'm going to take a look at this one. I'm not going to cut it, but I'll just show you. There's my 1/4 inch. I need to have a 1/4 inch on the side of the point. I've got issue here. It's not too bad except for right there. And then here's my last one. Need a 1/4 inch at the top. I want my 3 inch to go here. I would have a little bit of trimming there, but I'm still missing some here. It's not too bad there, so this isn't too bad. But really, if you look at this, I only got 1 unit that was exactly perfect, and that bothers me. I don't feel like This is easy to do. I think there was, as careful as I was, I feel like it still is very unpredictable. The waist, I think, was a lot. And the size of the unit being that 3 inches by 5.5 is really a difficult unit to use unless my whole quilt or my whole border or whatever it was using these particular units. Okay, so let's talk about the stroked flying geese unit. I found that this method involved a lot of trimming, quite a bit of fabric waste, and even with care, there was unpredictability when it came to the final size, as you saw. It works. Many quilters enjoy it. I watched many videos about this, and I could see either in their finished product or in what they were doing that they actually did not have accurately sized pieces in the end, but they were okay with that. If you're okay with that, that's absolutely fine. The problem that I found was this method just did not give me the consistency that I was looking for. So that's when I decided to come up with the foundation pieced way. I know some people don't care for foundation piecing, but I feel like that gave me a unit that was not only accurate, but there was very little fabric waste, and they are intentionally designed to finish at the same size, 2.5 by 4.5 unfinished, 2 by 4 finished, as the traditional flying geese unit. So instead of trying to fit a 2.5 by 5 inch unit into your quilt layout, the foundation pattern produces a 2 by 4 finished unit that blends seamlessly into blocks. So if you're doing it for, a block or a border or sashing or any pattern you're working on, this is my preferred method. You still get that same beautiful framed look, but you have measurements that behave much better than in quilt math. And because they're foundation pieced, you're sewing directly on the lines, which means accuracy is built in and waste is minimal. So I'm going to quickly go over how to foundation piece this unit right here. We're just going to make 2 units, and then we'll go back and review what we've done. This is the free PDF that you'll get if you're interested in this foundation pieced unit. You will make 4 units based on the 2 foundation patterns that are on one page. The fabric requirements are listed here, and I'm going to assume you know how to foundation piece. So I'm just going to go over this quickly. If you don't, I have a great class that teaches foundation piecing, and there are also several of our YouTube videos that go through the basics as well. So the first thing you're going to do is you print this off, or however many you need, and you're going to cut out the foundation pattern on the outside line. So this is 1, there's 2 per page. And first of all, before you do anything, you'll want to perforate all the lines on the foundation pattern, which I always do. I just use this. This is a traditional tracing wheel that we've used from sewing years gone by. And this is going to help not only with paper removal, but also with folding. So you won't have to use your ruler for the folding part of this process. So you're going to go through this, you're going to perforate. It's not really a perforation, it's kind of a denting because it doesn't cut through the paper. You just want to make those lines on your pattern easy to fold, and you'll see what I mean by that if you've never done it this way before. So all the perforations are here, and we are ready to assemble our block. Now, what pieces do you need? The pieces, as I said, are listed. You need a center piece that will actually go on our paper. If you're foundation piecing, this is A1. Then you will also need the frame pieces. There's 4 of those, A2, A3, A4, and A5. And then you'll need those corner pieces. So the pattern instructions tell you exactly what you need for that, for 1 block. Once this is all perforated, you're going to take your light board or whatever. I'm not going to use it because I can see what I'm doing here. But you want to center the A1 fabric on the wrong side of the paper. So the wrong side of the A1 fabric is up, the square. Center that, take your glue stick, and you're just going to put a little bit of glue there. Okay, that's going to secure it. Then, this is where the beauty of the foundation pattern comes from when we use that tracing wheel, is rather than using a ruler as a guide or whatever, it just folds nicely right on the perforation, and we are able to trim a 1/4 inch seam all the way around the edge. And you're going to do that. Just doesn't matter which order you do them in. You just want to make sure that we know that this piece was slightly oversized, and we just go all the way around the edge and trim a 1/4 inch seam allowance. That way, when we add our frame pieces, we know that we're going to have an accurate seam allowance. Now, as you can see, so far, that's all the waste that I've had on this. And this looks nice. It's all ready to go, and we are ready to add those pieces, A2, A3, A4, and A5. The way those are added, we're just going to put right sides together and center each one of our frame pieces right along the edge. Now, you can pin this. It does keep it in place a little bit better, but you want to make sure that your pin and the head of your pin is way far away from the seam where you're going to sew. And then you're going to sew starting off the edge and sew right off the paper. You're going to do A2 and A3. You can actually pin those at the same time. Just make sure that they're centered. And then you always press toward the newly added piece. So you'll do that for these two, trim up those edges, and once again, you're going to add the other 2 frame pieces. So here I've added the 2, A2 and A3. And then I want to trim it up. Now you've got some stitches that you have to release. You can see I've got a 1/4, but I've got too much here because those pieces were centered. So we're just going to trim that up on each side before we add the remaining 2 pieces. It doesn't matter if you pull it off exactly perfectly. You'll pick that off in the end. We just want to make sure that we've got these pieces all lined up. So there's our waist from that. We're going to take the remaining 2 pieces and once again center them, pin them, and sew on the marked lines. So here's 1 and 2. Turn it to the marked side, sew on the A4 and the A5 lines. Press again towards those newly added pieces. And here we have it. Now again, they're slightly oversized, so we need to trim back before we add those final corner triangles. So I'm going to just trim the 2 opposite ones. We're going to be adding A6 and A7, so I'm going to trim those first. I just fold on that perforation, and I'm going to trim one side, trim the other. You can actually trim all the sides if you want. I'm just going to do 2 at a time right now to show you. And then right sides together, we are going to place our corner triangles. You want to remember that you need to line up this point, and this edge needs to be straight. So what I like to do is I put a marking on my ruler, a line, and see. That way my ruler's straight. This is good, but this is over a little bit. So I just need to, they're slightly oversized, so it's not a big deal, but you just want to make sure they're as close as you can get them. And then we are going to pin this one. Same thing on this side. We want to line it up. If you see this, we're doing flying geese here, so they're not exactly perfect. So you don't want to line this point up with the corner because that's not the way it goes. We do want to line up this point with the corner, and it is. So I'm going to add 1 more pin, sew those corners on the A6 and the A7 lines, and press towards those newly added pieces. So we have added those 2 pieces. Now we need to trim our opposite sides and add the remaining 2 triangles. So I'm doing that. And we add these in the exact same manner that we added the others. We want to line up those 2 points, the point on our fabric with the point on our paper. We're going to pin 1. We're going to do the same thing on this side. Line up those 2 points. And the more you do, the easier it gets because you can eyeball it. And then we're going to sew on the 2 remaining lines, A8 and A9. So go ahead and do that. Press towards these 2 pieces. And I've done that. Everything is pressed in one direction. And we are going to trim this. So what we want to do is get our ruler, and this piece measures 4.5 by 5. So we want to make sure that we have lined up our markings on our ruler. And then we're going to trim. We're going to do the same thing in this direction. Remember, 4.5 by 5. And then we're going to cut apart on that center line where it says cut apart on dash line. Now we can still remember we want to keep everything lined up. And there we have our pieces. Now if you take a look, that's what we had, that's what we trimmed off. And we have those beautiful framed flying geese units that measure 2.5 by 4.5. So there you have it. That's my foundation pieced frame flying geese unit. So why do I prefer the foundation pieced version? First of all, accuracy every single time. You sew directly on the lines. There's no guessing, no oversized trimming, no fingers crossed the moment you measure the final blocks. It's perfect. Number 2, there is far less waste. The fabric pieces are cut to size to fit the foundation. There are no large squares or strips being trimmed down into tiny slivers. Number 3, the 2 at a time method stays consistent. The finished units match perfectly, making your quilt top much easier to assemble. I hope this comparison helps you choose the method that works best for you. If you love the original stroked flying geese, keep using it. But if you want something slightly more accurate and more efficient, give my foundation pieced version a try. Your free downloadable foundation pattern is linked below, so be sure to grab it. And while you're here, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap that notification bell so you don't miss any future quilting tips from Joyful and Merry Quilting. Thank you for watching, and remember, I am always trying to be joyful, but I will always be merry.